I am Dr. James Jones, and here at Rutgers, I'm an assistant professor of sociology and Africana studies. I have the great honor of serving as the inaugural director for Rutgers-Newark New Center on Politics and Race in America. So before we start our program tonight, I want to tell you a little bit about the center and the context from which it emerges. We live in a moment where there's an assault on knowledge about racism and race, where African American history is whitewashed for AP exams, where there are growing book bans, where there is a retrenchment to our commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are sweeping attempts at misinformation, and there is diminishing support for public institutions. That a Center for Race and Politics could emerge from this climate is astounding. And for it to emerge at a public institution, even more rare. But it's not unlikely that it comes from a place, or that it comes from Rutgers-Newark. Yes, give it up for Rutgers-Newark. Since I've come here since 2016, I've loved being here for many reasons, but one is that we don't shy away from confronting big problems. Instead, we lean in. We leverage our greatest assets, our diversity, our expertise, and our fervent commitment to the public good. And so it's with that commitment, those expertise, and our strong diversity that this new Center for Politics and Race is here. So CPRA seeks to fill a critical gap in our understanding of America's political landscape by serving as a non-partisan, multidisciplinary fact tank on the link between race and politics in the US. The center will have three different goals. It will serve as a data resource center that produces and rapidly disseminates high-quality data on race and politics at the national and state level, and with a particular focus on New Jersey, to serve as a cutting-edge training in critical methods and data analysis relevant to understanding and race and politics, and third, a resource for diversifying the people who have access into and ultimately pursue careers in public service. One of the things I'm so excited about is this summer, we are going to be putting four Rutgers University Newark students on Capitol Hill, and we are going to pay them. We are going to give them a housing, they're going to get a very competitive stipend. They're going to get housing, a travel allowance, and a clothing allowance. I know the power that these internships can have. I started off as a Capitol Hill intern. I don't want to run for office, but I can study it. And I know this will be a life-changing event for our students. What this all amounts to is an ambitious plan that will use research, education, and programming to enlighten, empower, and expand who participates in American politics. Before we start, I want to sort of shout out our team. One, I have to thank the Rutgers-Newark leadership, particularly Chancellor Counter, who years ago saw the vision for the center and has made it happen with state funding, right? And also our provost, Jeff Robinson. I would like to thank my partner in crime, my co-director, Dean Jacqueline Mattis. Our director of our public leadership program, who's making sure that our students get the best experience on Capitol Hill and Trenton and Newark. We're also putting some students in newspaper rooms in the city. Hyacinth Miller. And, of course, this fabulous event would not be possible without one person, Christina Strausberger. So thank you so much, Christina, for helping plan this event. Tonight we are joined by, tonight is our first public event, and we have a conversation between two best-selling authors, Keith Boykin and Clay Kane, to help discuss their latest books. Clay Kane is an award-winning journalist, writer, radio host, and political analyst. He earned his degree in African American Studies right here at Rutgers University, Newark. His insightful perspectives on race, culture, and politics have been featured in national publications such as The Washington Post, The Griot, and CNN. He made his mark as the director of the acclaimed BET documentary, Holler If You Hear Me, Black and Gay in the Church, which was screened at the Obama White House. Clay debuted The Clay Kane Show on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126 in 2017, which airs weekdays at 1 p.m. His first book is Live Through This, Surviving the Intersections of Sexuality, God, and Race. And he's here tonight to discuss his new book, The Grift, The Downward Spiral of Black Republicans from the Party of Lincoln to the Cult of Trump. It is already #1 on the Barnes & Noble sellers list, #1 on Amazon in African American history, and he's coming to us straight from The View. Keith Boykin is a New York Times best-selling author. He's a TV and film producer and a former CNN political commentator. He is a graduate of Dartmouth College and Harvard Law School. Keith served in the White House. He co-founded the National Black Justice Coalition. He has co-hosted the BT talk show My Two Cents, and he's taught at the Institute for Research in African American Studies at Columbia University. He is a Lambda Literary Award-winning author and editor of 7 books, and his latest is Why Does Everything Have to Be About Race? 25 Arguments That Won't Go Away. Please join me in welcoming Clay and Keith to Rutgers-Newark.
Two, 1, 2. Oh, there we go.
All right, so welcome, guys. So I want to talk about your books, which are great, and I've been reading them over the last week, and I can't put it down. They're so important and timely and well-researched. So, Clay, I want to start with you. Can you tell me what motivated you to write this book? And then also, I'm interested in the name The Grift. Why The Grift?
First, I want to say anybody who's here with Sirius XM, I don't know if you heard, but the legendary Joe Madison passed away. And he was a civil rights icon. He was a radio legend. He was the Black Eagle. He had a huge impact on me. And word just came out about 20 minutes ago that he passed away. So he worked with Rosa Parks. He was close with Dick Gregory. He did a lot of amazing work. For folks in here who do not know him, you should look him up right away, because I would not be here without Joe Madison. So yeah. I wrote The Grift, The Downward Spiral of Black Republicans from the Party of Lincoln to the Cult of Trump, because I wanted to burn down Massa's house. That was my intention of the book. And when I say that, I mean enslaved people in acts of resistance. They would often burn the house down, and they would burn everybody and everything within the house. So versus using master's tools and rearranging the furniture, you wanted to burn it down. And so when I think of grifters, I think of people who are infesting master's house. I think of people who are selling out and exploiting their own to do anything, to say anything, to perform, to audition, to get access to power. and proximity to power. And Black Republican grifters specifically, they shape-shift around political identity, and they provide racial cover in what I consider right now to be a white supremacist Republican Party. So, but the book starts after the Civil War. So the original Black Republicans were the original progressives. They were the ones who fought for public education. They fought for a life that was functioning for Black folks and poor white folks. And as I said on The View a couple days ago, I wanted to examine how we went from someone like Frederick Douglass to clowns on steroids like Clarence Thomas. And lastly, this has been a downward spiral. One of the things I lay out in the book, that it's not just about the downward spiral of Black Republicans, but the downward spiral of racial politics in the GOP. The Republican Party made a conscious decision, really before Lincoln was assassinated, because they were forgiving former Confederates and reinstalling, former Confederates in the South. But all throughout 1877, the Compromise, so and so on, they decided to turn their backs on Black people. And then by the 1960s, they tell Black folks, we don't want you in the party. So you see these prototypes of grifters emerging that said, wow, if I can align myself with this, there's a shorter line to political fame. There's a shorter line to a congressional seat. And nowadays, it's just being hired by a conservative organization and just, being a buffoon, and you will be celebrated. So where we are today is that I wasn't a big fan of General Colin Powell, but at least he had credentials, but there isn't even room for someone like him. Now we are at the bottom of the barrel, and there are grifters on the rise, Black Republican grifters on the rise, where their blood oath is to defend the worst parts of this country. And a prime example of that is Daniel Cameron, former Attorney General in Kentucky, who saw to it that the officer who killed Breonna Taylor did not get justice. He did the dirty work of Mitch McConnell, and really, I believe, harmed the family of Breonna Taylor. So I wrote the book for those reasons, and at the end I have a what's next chapter. I wanted to expose them, expose the grift, and Ida B. Wells once said that the way to right past wrongs is to shine the light of truth upon them. So I consider this book shining my light of truth.
So, Keith, you open up your book on talking about your last book and going on a tour at a local university in New York. Can you tell that story about and how that helped you to, start this book project and why this was so essential?
Thank you. We're on. Yay. Well, thank you for inviting me here, James, and thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to CPRA, I want to make sure I got the initials right, for hosting this event as well. And thank you to Clay Kane. I want to congratulate Clay, too, on the great work that he's doing. And I was at a similar event 2 years ago, about this time, Black History Month, giving a speech in upstate New York, talking about what was going on in the country, talking about my book, giving my previous book, giving a Black History Month discussion. And someone spoke at the end of the event, a white student, and he said, "You talked about all these things about Black people, but you didn't talk about economic issues and other types of issues." And I was thinking to myself, and I said to him, "This is a Black History Month event. What did you expect me to talk about?" And there was a sense, I think, the sense of entitlement and privilege that suggested that anytime Black people talk about issues that concern us, that somehow that means that we are not acknowledging what white people do, or that we are criticizing white people because we're talking about ourselves, or that somehow we're not centering white people in the way that makes white people feel comfortable. And all of that was very disturbing to me, and it was centering this one question that keeps coming up over and over again, which is, I understand you have all these things you want to talk about, but why do you have to keep talking about race? The question I get all the time. And the reason why I decided to write this book is because I spent 5 years, 5 really painful years, working for CNN. It wasn't painful because I was working for CNN. It was painful because I spent 5 years covering Donald Trump, from the beginning of 2017, January 2017, to the end of 2021, my job every day was to wake up and look on Twitter, read the news, find everything that Donald Trump was doing, and be able to talk about it on the news that night. And that was exhausting. He was exhausting. I don't want to have to go through that again. And a lot of the gaslighting that's taking place today started during the Trump era, where people would deny that there was racism taking place. From the moment he was elected, they were saying, oh, it wasn't racism, it was economic anxiety. It was just frustrating. And so I think where we are right now, the reason why I'm here, the reason why I wrote this book, honestly, is because I think we're sliding backwards. We are witnessing a dismantling of our rights as we speak, and we're witnessing an erasure of our history. And those two things really concern me. They've been dismantling our rights ever since, well, they've been doing it for a while, but they're dismantling the progress of the 20th century and the civil rights era since 2013, at least, when the Shelby County v. Holder decision eviscerated the Voting Rights Act. They've been dismantling our rights by attacking affirmative action. Just last year, they got rid of affirmative action. They dismantled our rights even when President Joe Biden tried to offer assistance to black farmers. They attacked that and said they couldn't do that. When black women tried to create a black venture capital fund for black women called the Fearless Fund, they're now in court challenging that, saying that you can't help black women can't help other black women, because that's unconstitutional. That's how they're twisting, grotesquely perverting the logic of the civil rights era legislation and the Reconstruction era legislation to change where we are. So I just think it's important that we not allow that history to be erased and not allow that dismantling to take place.
So, Clay, thinking about not wanting this history to be erased, one thing I really loved about your book was its reclaiming of Black history, reclaiming the power of Black Republicans as a party that really held Republicans accountable and pushed them to do the right thing, right? So there was a lot of talk about the party of Lincoln, but the party of Lincoln was originally racist, right? It was Frederick Douglass and other Black Republicans who pushed them to, adopt these stances which they're so noted for today, right? So being that it is Black History Month, can you tell us a little bit about some of these early Black Republicans and what they stood for and what they did?
Well, what I love about them is that they held their government accountable. I mean, can you imagine being Frederick Douglass and your life is at threat constantly and you're calling out the 16th President Abraham Lincoln for being a white supremacist, and you say that Abraham Lincoln is the most famous slave catcher in the country, and you say that Abraham Lincoln should not even be in office, and you actually create a third party called the Radical Democracy Party to see that Abraham Lincoln will not be reelected because you were so disgusted at how weak he was on slavery. And it wasn't just him, it was Harriet Tubman, it was Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, all these people that was one of the first rules of the original Black Republicans, is you held these people accountable. You held them accountable. That's why it's so vile what you see today. So that was incredible to me, where Frederick Douglass is literally meeting with Abraham Lincoln in person and telling him, you're allowing Black soldiers who can eventually fight in the Civil War to be tortured. You're not doing anything. And just some key things as well that, I assume we all know this, but I was on the radio today and somebody thought that the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves, and that's just not what happened. It was a war document to allow Black folks to fight in the Civil War. So there were so many incredible people during Reconstruction, and what was amazing to me is back then, they had 80% voter turnout in 1868. 80%. We can barely get 60% now, you know what I mean? But with that 80% voter turnout, they were able to take control over the South. And then what happens is, when people began to get that taste of power, you saw the early prototypes of other Black folks turning on other Black folks. You even saw a handful of them siding with Southern Democrats And there's one guy in particular, Isaiah Montgomery in 1890, who votes against black men being able to vote in Mississippi. And he was praised. He was worshiped in the media. He said, he is a great speaker. He is a great orator. So you give a little bit of grace to somebody back then. These are formerly enslaved people. But what you also see is that the black media at the time was calling them out, was blasting them. Frederick Douglass says about Isaiah Montgomery, saying that others will be dazzled by fame and imitate their bad example. And that just feels so prophetic for today. So what was beautiful to me is that I think many of the answers of how we can move forward, it really is in original black republicanism, which isn't what we have today. It's holding elected officials accountable. It's federal policies that will protect marginalized communities from violence. It is high voter turnout. All of these things that it's really admirable. And we have more power now than we had then. And I want us to use our power even more. Because if you don't do politics, politics will do you. So there was just so much that I learned from it. And I feel like the original black Republicans are rolling in their graves at what's happening right now. And that's what it makes it so insidious, and it makes it a grift. But again, there's turning points. And I feel like right now I feel like, to Keith's point, I feel like we're almost at the end of Reconstruction again. And Reconstruction falls in 1877, but they didn't really have the power to stop the fall. We have the power to stop the fall. We do, it's possible. But I'm just concerned people are sleepwalking.
So Keith, your book is broken down into 5 parts: erasing black history, centering white victimhood, denying black oppression, the myth of black inferiority, and rebranding racism. So I kind of want to start with one of your first chapters about critical race theory. So you dedicate the book to your late mentor, Derek Bell, who is widely known as the father of critical race theory. And as we know, critical race theory has been something that has come up in the flashpoint in the last couple years, has been demonized, but you learned from Derek Bell. So tell us, what is critical race theory? Is it as scary as they say it is?
Yeah, critical race theory is everything, everywhere, all at once, according to the Republicans. And the reality is, it is completely been blown out of proportion. We all know that. And it's one of those things that's just so frustrating to have to talk about this over and over again. But I went to law school with Professor Derek, I didn't go to law school with him. Professor Derek Bell was my law professor. And while I was in law school, he took a leave of absence to protest Harvard's failure to hire women of color. And he took a number of bold steps. Left Harvard, came to NYU. He left a job at Oregon to teach somewhere else. He repeatedly used his life as an academic, as a scholar, to be an activist as well. And he co-created a type of scholarship called critical race theory. Goes back to the 1970s and early 1980s. And Derek Bell was just the most wonderful, mild-mannered law professor, quiet, soft-spoken person you'd ever want to meet. And to see his scholarship vilified the way it's being demonized today as Marxism or telling people that they're being converted to hate white people and all this other misinformation, it's a purposeful distortion. The purpose of critical race theory, what I learned in my class in critical race theory in law school, it was about examining the way in which the law is used to reinforce racist structures. So we did things like we studied intersectionality in the law. We studied desegregation tactics and strategies. We studied things that were quite honestly beyond the comprehension of most grade school students and high school students. And so the idea that somehow they're actually teaching this in high schools and grade schools is so far beyond truth. But the problem is that they are teaching something that does scare people. And it's not critical race theory, it's American history. they're teaching the true American history. And what they've done is they've taken everything about American history that is not favorable to their view of the country and called it critical race theory. So the fact, and it is a fact, that Abraham Lincoln was a white supremacist who believed in segregation, who wanted to send black people back to Africa. Clay wrote about this. You can't say that to certain people because they think that you're creating a fake narrative. You can't talk about the fact that Thomas Jefferson was an enslaver who raped his ex-wife's sister. You can't talk about the fact that George Washington took the teeth from his slaves to put in his mouth. You can't talk about the fact that America has, from the very beginning, had a 3/5 compromise that meant that black people were counted only 3/5 of a human being for the purpose of apportionment in Congress. You can't talk about any of that history because if you do so, you're teaching critical race theory. No, it's not critical race theory. It's American history. Wake up and accept it.
So this semester, I'm teaching a new course here at Rutgers. It's called Black Capital, which is also my Twitter name. But it's called Black Capital. It's Black Americans in Congress. Some of my students are here. There we are. So next week, we're talking about Reconstruction. And I was reading your book, Clay, and it was so timely. And also, I learned so many new things. So I just want to geek out for a moment about Reconstruction and Black Republicans. So one is, I wonder if you could sort of talk about the differences between our first two Black senators and how they were both committed to, in a way, the Black struggle. But in many ways, their history is complicated, and it shows how early, this grift starts.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So the first Black senator representing Mississippi is a guy named Hiram Revels, right? And on the surface, it's a really good story, and he was always a free person. He comes down to Mississippi. So many Black folks come down to Mississippi because there was really some Black political movement happening. He is elected. What I love about this at the time, Mississippi was majority Black, right? And so senators at the time were not elected by the people, they were elected by the state legislature. So Black men, sadly, Black women weren't involved, which probably part of the reason why all things fall apart, you know what I'm saying? They said, you must have a Black man be senator. So the same day that the state rejoins the Union, February 1870, the state decides to let in Hiram Revels, but there was all this pushback. And the Southern Democrats pushed back against him, getting into office, being appointed. And the media at the time described him as having hands like claws. They describe him looking like an ape. It's just really disgusting. So he eventually gets into office, and his hands are tied, obviously. He's the first Black man in Congress. He's only in Congress for about a year or so, and he makes a lot of money doing speaking engagements. He ends up buying a plantation, and he leaves Congress doing more speaking engagements. And then he gets appointed president of Alcorn University. James Alcorn is a former Confederate, and he believes in a harness revolution, which means that we can have Black folks here, but all the white folks must have the power. And there were all these reports that he was siding with Southern Democrats, and he was profiting. There's a great historian from Mississippi, Julius E. Thompson, that says Hiram Revels is an example of how you do not find progress for Black people. So it's very interesting. And then there's also Blanche Bruce. Blanche Bruce is the second Black man in Congress representing Mississippi, United States Senator. And in the beginning, you see him doing really good work. And he begins voting to forgive former Confederates. Now you're thinking, okay, maybe he'll do that because he feels pressure, there could be some fear there. And he starts spending more time in D.C. with the D.C. elite. And he also owns a plantation. And there are reports that his plantations were as exploitive and in harsh conditions as white plantations. The black media at the time is slamming him. He marries a wealthy black socialite. They are the first black couple featured in the New York Times. And there are reports saying, you have forgotten your community. You have forgotten your community. And he's being called out for it. So, we're seeing just the beginning of a black social class forming outside of an enslaved economy in the South. And they're just trying to figure it out. But you see right away this taste of power. What is interesting is that Hiram Revels and Blanche Bruce, they pass away, doing fairly well. The other black Republicans who were relentless, who did not forgive former Confederates, who were always calling out racism that they were experiencing in Congress, like Robert Elliott, Robert B. Smalls, and so on, they would die in poverty. So it's very interesting, the ones that were steadfast and were unapologetic, they got pretty much no recognition in history, and their families and themselves suffered for it. So it's a sad story, but it's an important part of our history, again, to tell the good and the bad, to see what we can learn from this, how we can grow from this. And then, by 1877, the end of Reconstruction, there's barely any black men left in Congress, and by I think 1893 or 4, they're all out, all together. So it's interesting, and some of the other black folks that come into Congress, they were PBS Pinchback. He was a former riverboat gambler. He wrote the first Civil Rights Act in Louisiana. So it kind of goes to where we are today, the concessions that you have to make, the compromise that you have to make. Is it worth it? Is it worth the compromise? And then if you don't compromise and you get nothing done, either way you lose. It's really fascinating. It's a very interesting story. And then one of the most egregious things of Hiram Revels is there was this plan in 1877 in Mississippi to take over all areas of government in Mississippi. And black communities are set on fire, men, women, and children killed. And there was a congressional hearing, and they grill Hiram Revels on, did you see any violence in the state? And he says, everything has been peaceful. And that's on the record, Now, some historians say he was in fear. He had no choice. So it's important to know these stories. It's important to know the nuance of these stories. And again, in my book, I feel like I let the reader decide on their own, and then I lay out this history. And by the time we get to the Clarence Thomas era, who Derek Bell supported for the Supreme Court, that's very interesting. And so did Maya Angelou, supported Clarence Thomas for the Supreme Court. It's very interesting. By the time you get to this era, we know the history. There's no excuses. And yeah, but this is a part of the past. Not every black person in history is perfect. These are things to know, to learn, to grow from.
What's the old saying? Not all
my skin folk are kinfolk. Absolutely. Yeah. And then I have to also add quickly, the black media, the best part about the book was reading how shady the black media was. Like, you think black Twitter is something nowadays? Black media, they were wearing these people out. Like, Booker T. Washington was threatening black media outlets because he was getting so angry at how hard the black press was on him. I mean, it's so interesting how people think that we weren't as sophisticated back then. There was little to no technology. Nah, the analysis back then, the critique back then was just really brilliant.
So, Keith, you have a chapter called The Civil War Was About Slavery, Not States' Rights. So we have a presidential candidate, Nikki Haley, who has
Is she a candidate?
A contender. Who has said that the Civil War was about states' rights, but also most recently who has said that Texas has the right to secede from the U.S. if they want to. I don't think she has read your book, but what would you say to her?
Well, I think we have to be careful not to point our fingers solely at individuals without understanding the systemic nature of what's taking place. Nikki Haley doesn't believe half of the stuff she says. And I believe that not based on any knowledge of her personally, but because I assume that she's a relatively informed, intelligent person. Maybe I'm wrong. But if she is, and she was the governor of South Carolina, the first state to secede, by the way, from the Union, the state that fired on Union troops, rather, at Fort Sumter in South Carolina in April 1861 and started the Civil War, the state that had to be dragged kicking and screaming to pull down the Confederate flag from the Capitol while she was governor. If she knows all that history and still believes that A, the Civil War was not about slavery, and B, that America was never a racist country, and C, that Texas has the right to secede, which I'm just learning about now, then clearly she wasn't paying attention when she was the governor of the state of South Carolina. It's a reflection of the fact that she's saying these things because she feels she has to say these things to cater to the Republican Party. And this is one of the most frustrating things I find in my work that I do, is that so many Republicans today are invested in perpetuating a lie, a false narrative that they are the party of Lincoln. Well, first of all, the party of Lincoln has changed, and Lincoln was a white supremacist. But secondly, that party is gone. It vanished a long, long time ago, a century ago, or decades ago at least. And the irony of it all is that the same people who claim to be the party of Lincoln are the ones who are defending the Confederate flag, the ones who are defending the flag of the people who fought against Lincoln. They're the ones who were fighting to preserve, they talk about the quote-unquote Democrat Party, which is such a childish thing to say because it's a Democratic Party, but they say Democrat Party because they're supposed to make people upset. But they talk about the Democrat Party being the party of the Klan and the racist as if the Republican Party hasn't been the party of the Klan and the racist for the past 5 or 6 decades. As if history stopped in 1963 and didn't continue when Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, or the Voting Rights Act of 1965, or the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And the Republicans today are so invested in perpetuating this lie because they have to do it in order to believe that they're not racist, or to convince themselves and those around them that they're not racist. When we all know that the Republican Party has descended into racism these days. The truth of the matter is that no Democratic candidate for president has won the white vote since 1964 when Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. Not one. Jimmy Carter didn't do it. I worked for Bill Clinton. He didn't do it in either of his 2 elections. Barack Obama, I went to law school with him. He didn't win the white vote in either of his 2 elections. But you know who did win the white vote twice? Donald Trump. That's a reflection of just how the party of Nikki Haley has become so out of touch with reality. And she's not the only one. Ron DeSantis is out there saying that slaves actually benefited, that enslaved people benefited from slavery, that they could take their jobs and translate it into being a blacksmith later in life, as if there was a later in life for people who were enslaved for their entire lives. But this erasure of black history begins in the Republican Party many years before that, and one of the best examples is with Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump spent 5.5 years, from 2011 to 2016, lying about the first black president's birth certificate. This is what they're doing. As I said, there's 2 things they're doing. One is they're dismantling all the progress of the past 50 or 60 years for civil rights, voting rights, civil rights, employment discrimination laws, DEI, affirmative action. They're dismantling it all. The second thing they're doing is they are erasing black history. And that is part of what they're doing. They're erasing the truth about what we experience, from the civil rights movement to the Civil War, all the way back to Barack Obama.
Can I ask a question? Why do you think, I mean, that's what they do, they're performing, they'll say whatever, but why do you think that continues after decades and decades to resonate in high numbers with white voters? Because they keep getting real. Mississippi made April Confederate Heritage Month. Confederate Heritage Month, and Governor Tate Reeves got reelected. Why do you think this resonates with the base?
Well, I'm glad you said this, because this is not directly related to this, but it's indirectly related. I've been thinking about, you and I have had this discussion, and everybody in the media has had this discussion the past few months about Joe Biden not winning the black vote. That black voters are staying away from Joe Biden. He's only getting 80% of black men or something like that, and maybe only 90% of black women. Okay, that's still a lot, but here's the thing. I think we are asking the wrong question.
Oh, yes.
The question isn't why isn't Joe Biden or any Democrat winning 100% of the black vote. The question we should be asking is why do white people continue to vote for Republicans?
That's what I'm saying.
Why do white people continue to vote for Donald Trump? Why do white people continue to vote for the party that supports eviscerating the Voting Rights Act, taking away their rights for black people to have employment discrimination laws, taking away affirmative action, taking away DEI, attacking Claudine Gay? All these things are all part of an orchestrated effort by white America. It's not about Democrats or Republicans, it's about white Americans. And what people forget is that the Democratic Party and Republican Party were both equally racist for hundreds of years. You know, it wasn't until the 60s when one party started trying to move in a different direction. But the truth is that white people were perfectly comfortable being Democrats when Democrats were racist. But once the Democrats stopped being racist, white people stopped being Democrats. That's what happened. So we shouldn't be asking why Democrats can't win working class voters. They do, because most black voters are working class voters and black voters vote overwhelmingly for Democrats. But we should be asking is why do white people continue to vote for Republicans, a party that is invested in racism? And that is the question that I think will get us to a point where we can move forward in the conversation. And I think, you know, to directly answer your question, it resonates, those Confederate appeals resonate because the Republican Party is a party of white supremacy. And it has been for the past 6 decades. And you know that.
Yeah. But you know, the other thing too is that I agree with you. I mean, obviously I agree with you on all those policies you laid out, but on top of that, poor white folks vote Republican at high numbers, and Republicans have such anti-poor policies, anti-middle-class policies. White evangelicals vote for the GOP at high numbers. Trump is so far from a damn evangelical, porn stars and paying people off, and 5 different children, 3 different women, and I mean, drama, divorce, lies, can't even quote a Bible verse right. It's just, even in the world of whiteness, it's just fascinating that just the fever to vote against your own interests, and I think it's the bloodthirst for white nationalism.
I have to bring Derek Bell back into this conversation.
Bring him back.
Again because
back again.
I have to bring Derek Bell back in the conversation because Derek Bell wrote a wonderful law review article, I think in the 70s or early 80s, and Cheryl Harris wrote another one that followed about the property right in whiteness. The property right in whiteness. That is to say that even the poorest white person still has a property right, an economic right in their whiteness. So yes, you may not have as much money if you're poor and white as Oprah Winfrey or Beyonce or someone like that, but you do have your whiteness, which means that there is an economic value attached to that. When you raise your hand and when you walk outside of this door, you raise your hand to get a taxi, you're still more likely to be picked up than a black person. If you get pulled over in your car, you're still more likely to not be arrested or not be harassed if you're white than if you're black. If you apply for a job and don't have a black-sounding name, you're still more likely to be taken seriously, offered an interview. All those different attributes of whiteness that are invisible to so many people, this thing called white privilege, which Peggy McIntosh calls an invisible knapsack of privileges. All these things that you have, that you take for granted, that black people don't have, those are economic benefits.
You know, the other thing too, I'm sorry, but you know what's so funny is that what scares me, so what it really is also, it's otherism, is that people at the top have been able to convince a lot of white folks that it's that other person taking your job. It's the immigrant taking your job. It's the trans person why your girl isn't good at sports. It's the black person, I mean, all this stuff. But you know what really scares me? Because that's just gaslighting, right? There, you know, look over there. But it's when we fall for it. When I have folks call into my radio show saying, oh, well, all these immigrants are coming over and they're taking jobs from black people. I said, we had a job issue among black folks before there was a quote-unquote immigrant crisis. I have folks calling in randomly bringing up trans people. And I'm like, y'all are doing the same thing that white folks have done for centuries. You are falling for the look over there concept. And that's what really scares me. If we do not get over that, if we do not fall for masses' tools, Lord, that's boys to men, end of the road. So I know we've come to the end of the road. Get a passport.
So Clay, this is, I guess this is a question for both of you, like changing gears a little bit. But it's a question about where do we go from here, right? As someone who teaches and talks with a lot of students, our political system is not great. There is a lot of hopelessness, right? That, Republicans, there are grifters there are grifters in the Democratic Party. How do we change something? What is the point of getting involved in politics at all?
So, when I was at Rutgers-University Newark here, I was very, quote unquote, I thought I was some kind of revolutionary, which I wasn't, but I thought I was. And I didn't believe in voting because I felt like, fuck the system, it doesn't work, it's all ridiculous, and no one's gonna win and no one's helping me. And like I said earlier, if you don't do politics, politics will do you. So if you don't like what you see in your politics, the answer is not to disengage. You have to engage more. And I know folks are tired of hearing it, and it may sound trite, it may sound cliche, but we have to play the long game. This thing called progress is a long game. You don't get what you want in 3 years sometimes, or in 4 years, or in 2 terms. The Republicans waited 50 years to overturn Roe v. Wade. They began attacking the 1964 Civil Rights Act immediately. So I would say that, we have to really capitalize on our vote. And I see so many people tapping out. I did once upon a time. But when I saw people jumping out of those buildings during 9/11, and I saw President Bush reading My Pet Goat for 7 minutes, I said, I will never not vote again. I will never not vote again. So, sadly, I feel like people, they believe they're doing something by not engaging, and you're only letting the other side win. And voting is just one tool in the toolbox. But if we can't utilize that tool, like if you look at the 2022 midterms, we had some amazing people running for Congress. We had Gary Chambers in Louisiana. He was on TikTok begging people to vote. This is a black man running for senator in Louisiana who believes in reparations, who believes in decriminalizing marijuana, all the things you want. When I hear people upset that Biden's old, I always say, well, did you vote during the primaries? Did you support anybody during the primaries? So I think I want us to take over the Democratic Party the way the Tea Party and the MAGA movement took over the Republican Party. I want us to fully capitalize on our power. And I'm sorry, that's just one tool in the toolbox, but if you aren't doing step A, you aren't gonna get to B, C, D, and E. And politics is pragmatic. You gotta make a decision. It's a give and take. So I start with that, using that tool in the toolbox. And what I don't want to get to, I don't want to get to a point where we're back to 1868 and then we have 80% voter turnout because we're terrified. The last time there was high youth voter turnout was during Vietnam. Why? Because young folks are being drafted and forced to die in Vietnam. So that's that one click that I feel like a lot of people don't get. And it's easy to be contrarian, and a rapper can be contrarian. You'll see him on Fox News, and it's easy to spit out propaganda. Propaganda is profitable. But at the end of the day, I want us to fully capitalize on our power. That's the step that I see moving forward. Take a page from Bayard Rustin and Dr. King and so on.
So Keith, can I ask you to talk about what does it mean to work in the White House as a person of color, as a gay man, right? So I've been trying to sort of talk about the power of working in political institutions and why it matters. So we have someone like E. Frederick Murrow, who is a Rutgers graduate, who was the first black man to work in a professional position in the White House. what does it mean to like not only vote, but also to work in these places?
Wow, I was not expecting that question, but I like that question because I never really get asked that. But I don't think I started working in the White House when I was 25, I think. I worked in the Clinton administration. I don't think I realized just what that meant, what the significance was, as a black gay man, actually. But I do remember that early on in the administration, there were issues that concerned me, things that I saw President Clinton doing that I didn't agree with. And I realized that I was in a position that I could speak up and say something about it, and I did. Didn't change anything, but at least I had my voice counted. And so I was able to do things that made some bit of a difference. I remember when the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which was a bill that outlawed discrimination against LGBTQ people, came up in 1994, 1995, for example, something like that. And I remember sitting in the room, in the Roosevelt room across from the Oval Office, with about 10 or 12 senior staff people in the White House. And every single one of them, except for me, myself and one other person, was opposed to going out and publicly supporting this bill, which the president already said he supported. And the only other person who supported me was a man named Deval Patrick, who was at that time the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, and he later became the governor of Massachusetts. But he and I were the only two people in that room of like 10, 12 people, only two people who stood up and said, this is wrong, we have to do the right thing here. And so sometimes, even if you don't win on those difficult policy debates, it's important to have that voice represented. It's important to be present when those decisions are being made, so they know they can't just run over you and ignore those issues. Now, I will say this, and this goes back to Clay's point. I knew when I started working for Bill Clinton, I didn't agree with him on every issue. One of the things I've been very, very clear on from the beginning, I found an article I wrote about this in 1983, 40 years ago, just not long ago. I found the article. And I was condemning the death penalty. And I wrote a local newspaper column in the St. Petersburg Times in Florida. And I was condemning the death penalty. And I haven't changed my position about that my entire life. But Bill Clinton supported the death penalty. He even executed a black person, Ricky Ray Rector, shortly before his presidential election because he wanted to show he was tough on crime. And I had a lot of problems with that. But I feel like what Clay was saying, we have to figure out ways that we can engage where we can engage. I don't agree with Joe Biden on his policy in Gaza. I think he's wrong. I don't think we should be giving billions of dollars to support Israel. But at the same time, I have to say, I'm still going to vote for Joe Biden over Donald Trump any day of the week. I'm not going to waste my vote and not vote. I'm going to push Joe Biden. I'm going to say it very publicly. I don't agree with this policy. I went to law school with Barack Obama. I spoke out when I disagree with his policies. I didn't agree with his position on marriage equality when he came into office. I spoke out about that. I didn't agree with his position on drones. I didn't agree with the big compromise he was making with Republicans, the grand bargain to try to bring down the debt. I didn't agree with his refusal to include a public option plan in his Obamacare, Affordable Care Act. And I criticized publicly all those things, and I still voted for him in both those elections. I was on CNN almost every day in 2020 criticizing Joe Biden for being too old to be the candidate for the Democratic Party, and I still voted for him. So we have to understand that we have to still vote, but that doesn't mean just because you vote somebody you don't hold them accountable. Vote for them and then demand that they do what you want them to do.
So I have one final question for Clay, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So I have to ask, as a proud graduate of Rutgers-Newark and from the African American Studies Department, how did your experience in the department help you in your career today?
Oh, it completely changed my life. It really did. The school changed my life. Before I went back to school when I was 24. I went to Penn State for one semester rather, and I dropped out. I didn't believe in college. I thought it was all a joke. I said, this is all a system. Fuck the system. I don't care about this stuff. And I would go out and protest and be on the streets, but I didn't believe in any kind of higher education. And then I wanted to get out of working full time. I was like, okay, I cannot stand this working full time. And I had a job that said, well, if you go back to school, we'll keep you working part time. I said, okay, let me just go back to school. And Rutgers was close to me. And I met a woman, and I wish I remembered her name, in the administrative office. And she said, okay, you can apply. I said, well, I'll come back next week and apply. There was no online stuff at that point. And she said, there's no better time than the present, apply. And so I applied, and I got in, and I was originally a social work major. Then they told me I had to intern for free, and I said, I ain't doing that. I said, I ain't working for free. I ain't doing no internship. You must be crazy. And I began taking Black Studies courses, and my first teacher was Dr. Zain Abdullah. And the first day, I always hated history. The first day in class, he changed my life. I learned about all these, I grew up in a bad public education system in Philadelphia. I didn't know anything. I was really bad at history. And he just taught me the first day what we were going to learn. I saw the syllabus, and I saw the books that we had to buy, and there were people who looked like me and looked like my father and looked like my cousins and my aunties. I could relate to it. It made sense. I had an immediate passion for it. It changed my life. And I learned I heard about a Frederick Douglass, I heard about Harriet Tubman, but I learned everything. I learned civics. I really didn't know how government worked. That's another reason why you're disengaged. Folks don't know how a bill becomes a law. It changed everything for me. Dr. Zain Abdullah, Dr. Wendell Holbrook, Dr. Barbara Foley, who was a white teacher, and I never forget, she did a radical literature class. And this wasn't a Black Studies course. And she gave us all the books, and all the books were Black authors, except for one. And it wasn't a Black radical, it was radical literature. And one of the white students raised their hand and said, why are all these books by Black authors? And she looked at that white student and laid into her and said, I've been in so many classes where it said so-and-so literature, and it was all white authors, and nobody ever asked that question. How dare you? I said, oh my God, this is it. This is it. I took so many of her classes. I even took graduate courses of hers. Oh, she was radical. She was like the Tina Marie of Rutgers University. Oh my God, I loved her. And she told me, she was like, Clay, you are very special. There's something really special about you. So this school changed my life. Still paying my student loans, though, about shoot house. Still got that bill. Did everything for me. I fell in love with history. I fell in love with me. It was really fundamental to who I was. And I couldn't have written this book. It's blowing up right now. I couldn't have written it without this school. And I got into so many heated debates, and I was really good here. So when teachers were messing up, I'd call them out. I would walk right to that dean baby. Oh, I said, I paid $645 for this course. You're gonna get this right. So I still brought my radicalism with me in that classroom. I know they were looking at me like, rrr, but it was everything. I love this place. I honestly and truly do. I walked away. I was a different person by the time that I graduated. So I love Rutgers University Newark, and I really mean that. I really do. Where are you, Dr. Foley? Oh, she was good. She was good.
We can start with questions from the audience. Brooke. We're coming to you.
Sorry, could you raise your hand? Yes.
Hi, so I want to talk about the two parties, because we were we were really just, I have Professor Jones as my professor right now. We were just talking about Democrats and Republicans. I've kind of reached to the point where I'm always gonna vote, but I'm kind of sick of people saying like, well, this is the better option, but like you said, like, how do you do further than just holding them accountable besides talking about it? And also, how do you deal with black politicians? Because I've met a lot of black people in positions of power who don't take issues of intersectionality and like misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, ableism. Like, how do you deal with people like that?
So let me ask you a question. Do you feel like where we're at right now, Democrats and Republicans, do you feel like it's the lesser of the two evils? Do you feel that?
Very much.
You do? So let me push back on that a little bit. And we could see it differently, and that's beautiful. That's what college is all about. I think we have to be able to make really clear distinctions. I don't think Biden is perfect, but I don't think Biden is evil. I think the Republican Party and Trump, they do not want you and I to exist. So I just let me just get this out. You know, so I hear you. But what scares me sometimes is because the other side, the GOP side, they don't think that. They think Trump is their messiah, right? And they want us. One of the big mistakes that happened in Nazi Germany is the Communist Party said, the Nazi Party and the Social Democrats, that was the other party, they're exactly the same. They're the lesser of the two evils. And we see how that ended. So I'm with you. Let's critique Biden all the way. But I think we have to really be able to make distinctions of one party that we got to fix. And I want to vote in more, I don't know if you know, like Jamal Bowman's, Ilhan Omar's, Ayanna Presley's. Yeah. Let's vote more of them in. Yeah. So I want us to engage more. If you don't like what you see, vote the old guard Democrats out. Kick them out. But at this point, being pragmatic and strategic, we have to be able to keep the executive branch. If we lose the executive branch, what the other side wants to do, it's called Project 2025, they want to erase all power in Congress and give all power to the executive branch. So I feel, if you feel that way, I hear what you're saying, but I've seen a lot of wins in this administration that what troubles me is that I feel like if we can't acknowledge our wins, we don't know when we're winning. You know what I'm saying? So the way you hold them accountable, you vote them out, but I think there are some clear distinctions between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And I get concerned when we're not seeing those distinctions. But we could see it differently. You know, I could go the whole list of, I'm a black gay man. My very right to exist is in jeopardy under a Trump administration. It's completely in jeopardy. And I can't afford to, I said a passport, but I can't afford, where am I gonna go? We as black gay men, where are we gonna go? We can't go to an African country, sadly. We can't go to a Caribbean country. I damn sure don't wanna go to Europe. So yeah, I wanna see distinctions, but go ahead.
Yeah, same boat. Black, bi, autistic, so obviously like America's not looking great for me either. But how do you deal, especially with like a lot of those, because sometimes I argue that with my parents, because like I'm also Caribbean, like Jamaican and Kenyan, and I argue like, but you have to acknowledge that intersection, the things that make you uncomfortable, like disability, homophobia, transphobia, ableism. Like, what do we do with like a lot of those black politicians that don't want to acknowledge like all black lives, not just the ones that they're comfortable with?
That's a separate half, but you want to take that part?
Well, yeah, I'll talk a little bit about both. Those are the black Republicans for the most part. I mean, you can't be a black Democrat in 2024 and not acknowledge intersectionality. If you do, you lose. I just got a text message today from my friend Malcolm Kenyatta, who's running for office in Pennsylvania, who's a state representative there. He's a black gay man. And one of the people who's running against him is a black man who just announced recently, and he has said some homophobic things. And Malcolm sent me a message about it. And clearly, this guy, once people start to learn about that, it's going to be a problem for him. And I think that is one of the principal differences. And I think that's kind of the point that Clay was getting at, that the Democratic Party is far from perfect, but the Democratic Party has people in it who do look like you, sound like you, and represent you. Joe Biden may not be that person, but there are other people out there who do. And I think part of the problem is that when we talk about American politics, we have this binary structure because of our system of government, where you only have two choices for president. I mean, you can vote for a third-party candidate. You're wasting your time because they have no chance of winning. I mean, I love Cornel West. I've known him since 1995, I think. I will still not vote for him, not because I don't agree with him, because he has no chance of winning. He won't even be on the ballot in every state. I'd be throwing away my vote and helping to elect Donald Trump by voting for him. Joe Manchin, third-party candidate possibility from Virginia, West Virginia. That guy, he doesn't care about you or me or anybody else in this room. He cares about the coal mining industry and driving his Maserati and helping to kill the minimum wage increase. So there are different types of people in the Democratic Party, but there are people in the Democratic Party who do care about these issues. The other thing is that the people who were stopping the Democrats from doing some of the things that you and I both agree are the Republicans. I mean, there are three major pieces of legislation that I was concerned about in the Biden administration to move progress forward. One is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
My God.
Biden tried, it didn't work, Republicans filibustered. The next is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act.
Who gutted that?
Tim Scott.
Demon.
Black
That's
Republican.
a demon. That's the devil.
Black Republican Tim Scott.
And went on TV and lied about it and said that it defunded police when it actually gave more money to police.
Yes.
I mean, lied about it.
So they're trying to do police reform, and the Black Republican stops it. The third bill that was important to me, this is something they've been trying to do for 100 years, the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act. And Joe Biden was the first president to be able to sign the Anti-Lynching Act to help black people. It's named after Emmett Till, who was murdered in 1955, but they've been trying to do this since 1920. 1920. It took until just last year, was it the year before, one of these two past years, when they were able to finally pass an anti-lynching act to help black people. So those are three very important things. One, they accomplished. Two, they couldn't accomplish because Republicans were against it. So we have to know who the real enemy is in order to do it. Last part I just want to say is, I have been saying this to a lot of people recently, and you may disagree with me or not, but the whole system is screwed. I mean, we need to change the entire system, but you can't do it by stepping out of it. I think that we need to abolish the Electoral College completely.
And we almost did in 1970, and it was blocked by a filibuster.
Republicans used to support eliminating the Electoral College until the Electoral College helped them to win the two elections in the past 20 years without winning the popular vote. So now they don't care about it, but they used to support this too. We need to abolish that. It's anti-democratic. We need to abolish the United States Senate entirely. The Senate is an anti-democratic institution. Some people think we just need to have a filibuster reform. That's not it. The fact that I live in the state of California with 39 million people, and we have 2 U.S. senators, while the state of Wyoming, which is overwhelmingly white and only has 600,000 people, has the same number of U.S. senators as we do, is unfair. It's unfair, and as long as you have this skewed system, that means that people from big states like mine, that are diverse and represent different types of people, only get the same number of votes as all these small white states in the middle of the country. Land shouldn't get votes. People should get votes. And that is part of the problem that needs to be changed. And thirdly, we need to change the House of Representatives so we don't have gerrymandered elections. All those three things, every part of the system needs to be changed. But you can't do that if you don't vote, because if you don't vote, they're going to take away every single right that you have. They're trying to take those rights away now. They're in court trying to take, one quick last thing, reparations. I support reparations. I believe in reparations. It's never going to happen. Not ever. It's never going to happen unless we vote, because they are making it illegal. If they make it illegal for black women, private business to give money to other black women, do you think it's going to be legal to give out reparations? They are changing the law. They are rewriting the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which was written to help black people. They're rewriting it with this fake colorblindness to suggest that anything you do to help black people will be unconstitutional. That's why they're able to attack affirmative action. That's why they're able to attack DEI. That's why they went after Claudine Gay. That's why they're going after the Black Farmers Relief. That's why they're going after the black women trying to provide venture capital funding for black businesses, because they are making anything pro-black unconstitutional. While we're sitting here talking about other kind of crap, they are taking away our rights. We need to wake up and pay attention and not you, but we need to wake up, pay attention, and stay focused so they don't take away our rights while we're arguing amongst ourselves.
Wait, I'm sorry, look, can I just say one quick thing? As far as dealing with black folks who, they don't get intersectionality, listen, I learned a long time ago, I am not gonna sit in oppression. I'm not gonna argue with you for my right to exist. I was called a faggot many times on this very campus by people who look just like me. This was years ago, but I went through that. So there are certain times for your mental health and your well-being, if you're experiencing that, it's okay to tap out and say, you know what, I'm not even gonna argue this with you. I'm not gonna debate my right to exist with you. I'm here, I deserve to be at this table. My father is deeply conservative. He would never vote Republican, but he cannot stand my gay ass. But I won't engage. That's your issue, it's not mine. I'm not gonna take it on. So for folks who you are experiencing that with, it's okay to step away and let them grovel in their own misinformation and their own hate. Some folks you cannot convert. So I hope we gave you something.
That was great, thank you. I also have Professor Holbrook from last year and this year. He's great.
I love Dr. Holbrook. We went at it a couple times, but I love Dr. Holbrook.
Thank you. So we have another student question I want to make sure we get to. Victor.
1 sec.
Wait.
Hi, I'm also taking Dr. Jones's Black Capital course. This is a question for Keith. What strategies do you suggest for engaging with individuals who firmly hold onto arguments about your race theories that you critique?
What strategy would I encourage for individuals who fervently hold on to what? Again, I'm sorry.
Engaging on, holding on to arguments opposing your theories and your...
Oh, holding on to arguments opposing... Oh, okay, well, the reason why I wrote this book, it's the title of the book is, Why Does Everything Have to Be About Race? Which is not a question I ask, but it's a question that people ask me. But the subtitle is 25 Arguments That Won't Go Away. So the book debunks 25 toxic racist arguments. And everything from Barack Obama solved racism to Martin Luther King said we should be colorblind to affirmative action is reverse racism, all those arguments. And the reason why I wrote it is because it's tiring having to answer these questions and look up the information, what's the truth. You know the truth, you know they're not right. So I wanted you to have a handy reference guide. And I also wanted you to understand, as Toni Morrison says, and I quote her in the beginning of the book, that the function of racism is distraction, that they want to distract you. They want to keep you focused on answering their questions. So the answer to your question is, I don't really spend time trying to convince people who are not invested in having serious dialogue. I'm willing to talk to anybody and debate with anybody if they're willing to have a serious conversation. But if it's just repeating talking points and not opening their minds, I think that's a waste of our time. As Toni Morrison would say, we could be spending our time helping to recruit other people who actually are winnable, persuadable, instead of talking to people who are never going to be convinced. So my strategy is to let them be, either let them wander in the wilderness and figure it out, or let them continue to sulk and be upset about the fact that people are actually demanding to be treated equally.
Okay. So one, then two. So right here, and then right
Right here?
yeah. Oh, sorry. He's sending. Yes.
Yes, good evening, Keith and Clay. It's always wonderful to see you. My name is Dashan Farad. I'm also a journalist and a broadcaster. When the both of you brothers mention intersectionality, I want to ask you, do either of you feel that there was a potential danger in black people entering into these intersectional relationships? Because as Dr. John Henry Clark had warned us, he would always say, black people, you have no friends. And he would always mention that oftentimes, whenever black people enter into these intersectional relationships, specifically with non-blacks, we end up becoming used often as fronts for other communities.
Can I stop and ask you a question? I'm not sure if we're talking about the same thing. Are you saying intersectional or interracial? Because we're talking about intersectional, but it sounds like you're talking about interracial. Am I wrong?
I would say both, because oftentimes when we speak about intersectionality, that can also include white women as well. Am I correct?
Oh, well, no, well, actually, the intersectionality is a term that Kimberly Crenshaw coined.
Yes, sir.
The famous law review article in the University of Chicago. And she talks about it from the perspective of being a black woman. And in the same way as Sojourner Truth, it says, ain't I a woman? The whole notion that as a black woman, you're getting it not just from white people, but also from sometimes other black men. And creating an inclusive, open-minded, embracing, intersectional movement is my goal. That was also Dr. King's goal. One of Dr. King's closest advisors, even though he sometimes was disloyal to him, was Bayard Rustin, as we mentioned before. One of the reasons why Coretta Scott King was one of the first champions of not just civil rights for black people, but civil rights for women and LGBTQIA people. One of the reasons why Dr. King said injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It's one of the reasons why Dr. King, this is intersectional too, Dr. King was criticized by some people in the movement because he decided on April 4th, 1967, a year before he was assassinated, to go to the Riverside Church in Harlem and give a speech condemning the Vietnam War, because he realized that it wasn't enough to speak out against injustice against black people, but he was willing to speak out against injustice halfway across the world in Vietnam. And so I think all of our interests have to be connected if we expect to be able to liberate ourselves. Black women, black gay men, black trans people, black immigrants, black indigenous people, black people who come from different experiences and backgrounds still need to be included in this perspective. That's why I believe in a Pan-Africanist viewpoint of embracing all black people, regardless of where we come from.
Hi, I just want to say thank y'all for holding this space, and it was really spontaneous for me to even be here. I was just in Source of Knowledge bookstore and I saw your flyer and I was like, wow, this is such an engaging conversation. But I really want to say my encompassing question here, and everything that I'm hearing you guys say is, what does reparations look like to you? Because when you're mentioning that, reparations is something we're not going to see, obviously in our lifetime, just like we don't see the end of capitalism happening in our lifetime as well, I also feel like it's so tangible to see that we can make use and capitalize on our vote by voting for what we want and what we deserve. I feel like the question that I want to ask you guys is I feel like in the past, since the last election at least, voting for the better of two evils, that I shouldn't have to feel that way. I feel like obviously in the future I would love to see ranked choice voting, where we have multiple options that we can look at and see as tangible. So I'm kind of curious on what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I know you probably want to speak on this here. For the ranked choice voting, I like that idea. I know New York City does it. I don't know if it would work in the presidential election, though. I think what I would prefer is a parliamentary system. And I know parliamentary systems have their problems. We have a different system of government, 3 branches of government, and the executive is separate from the legislature here. But in the parliamentary system, you vote for whoever you want to vote for at a local level, and then those people cobble together and pick a prime minister, pick the leader of the party. And in order to do that they sometimes have to build coalitions with other parties. So you can vote for the Green Party, or vote for the Communist Party, or vote for whatever party you want to vote for, because that party then gets to go represent your interest in forming a government. The other advantage of the parliamentary system is that the leader, the prime minister, is able to do pretty much whatever she or he wants to do without having to get the approval of Congress. Here, every time Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Donald Trump or Barack Obama or anybody who might be president wants to do something, they have to get Congress to sign off on it. Just being elected president does not make you a dictator, even though Donald Trump might want you to think that that's the case. So I think we need to change all that as well. And I forgot the first part of your question, which was probably the most important part too.
What was the first part again?
Oh, reparations. I just want to say quickly, I have a chapter about reparations in my book. And I talk about what it looks like to a lot of different people, how black people have been talking about it for years, how America has paid reparations to different groups of people, and that we paid reparations to enslavers. That when Lincoln signed the District of Columbia Compensated Emancipation Act in 1863 that freed slaves in the District of Columbia, they actually paid out reparations to the white people who owned the slaves, but not to the black people who actually were the slaves. And I'm not saying that it will never happen. I'm saying it won't happen unless we engage in the process. But for me, reparations doesn't mean just a check. It means a change. And it means that we have to have structural change throughout society. My measure is in every indicator of society, employment, healthcare, education, housing, policing, that we need to have equality or parity, and that reparations means that we do whatever it takes to create that equality and parity. Not equality in opportunity, but equality in outcomes. And if that means we spend billions of dollars or trillions of dollars to do that, that means that we do that. If that means that we provide free college education to black people, that means we do that. If that means that we provide advantages to black people we don't provide to other people, that means we do that. But one of the other things it means to me personally, because I'm someone who didn't know anything about my family, I didn't meet my father until I was 50 years old. One of the things it means to me is I think we need to be able to find our history. I think America needs to subsidize, to pay for us to be able to retrace our history, because they stole it from us, and they have a responsibility to bring that history to us.
I think Keith nailed it.
Wait. Me? Okay. Well, I had a couple of things, but I can't. So I was going to talk about Shays Rebellion, because that's the foundation of keeping poor white people and black people apart from each other. So I was going to ask Clay about that, but we kind of did. I was going to ask him about the doctrine of Christian dominant discovery and how that serves as the foundation for a lot of confusion and chaos. I was going to ask, with regard to banning the books, there are a lot of things that people who are banning books don't even know. They don't know about Ivan Van Sertima, who taught here at Rutgers University, or Henry Clark, or Dr. Ben Yakahan. So there are people they don't even know about the ban. So instead, I decided, since you're talking about politics, that I would read Frank Zappa's piece. Civics was a class, especially because the Newark students can now vote. They got the right to vote. I don't know if they'll do it this year, but 16 and 17-year-olds, the Newark City Council passed the ordinance so that they can vote in the school board election. But in that note, I'll just say what Frank Zappa said. Civics was a class that used to be required before you could even graduate from high school. You were taught what was in the U.S. Constitution, and after all the student rebellions, keep in mind, the rebellions in the 60s, civics was banished from student curriculum and was replaced by something called social studies. Here we live in a country that has a fabulous constitution, which for some reason when we take our constitution, we never take our constitution to other countries, but anyway. And all these guarantees, a contract between the citizens and the government. It's a contract between us and the government. Nobody knows what's in it. It's one best kept secret, and so if you don't know what your rights are, how can you stand up for them? And I think that's the problem. A lot of people don't know what their rights are. And the last thing, if anybody knows anything about the role of birth control being used in the 1960s and 1950s as the foundation for Trumpism today, can you speak on it? Birth control, last 50s, white men.
I don't know about Trumpism and the birth control. I'm sure he's paid for some. I don't know that one. I'm sorry.
In the 1950s and 60s, when women could use birth control pills,
right?
White men were beginning to be threatened, and that was sort of like the beginning of Trumpism before you even knew about Trump. So I would encourage people to go back and look in the 1950s, because Trump didn't just happen.
Oh, yeah.
It was evolution from the 1950s, particularly white women, so now you don't have to be barefoot and pregnant. You had a choice.
Thank you. So there is a hand all the way in the back.
The steno in here?
Oh, sorry. Yes, and this is our last question.
Hi, so I have a question kind of adding to that, because my belief is that Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered specifically because he brought an incredibly powerful coalition of poor white people and African Americans and Latinos together. So my question is, to both of you, do you think, because I heard somebody say economics isn't really a part, and I get that, obviously, I think, because political economics exists as a topic, because politics and economics and everything else that relates to politics and economics is inherently deeply connected. Can you speak on that specifically, and how we can kind of bring, maybe like return that coalition to like a, if we can at all, bring back that coalition that Martin Luther King Jr. was trying to establish in the first place?
Well, yeah, so Dr. King and Fred Hampton, a lot of folks forget him as well, they really saw poor black folks, poor white folks, Native Americans as well, Latin folks working together. And the argument is that that's what really terrified the powers that be, that really scared the hell out of people. As far as how we can get back to that, I just don't know. I'm not sure how we can convince poor white folks to be on that side. You know what I mean? And then we also have classism in black communities as well. So there is that intersection of race and class, and I believe race and class are really, they are embedded together. And that's the journey we've been on in this country. You create more of the have and the have-nots, you create more otherism, and you're pointing the finger, like I said earlier, at the person below you versus the person above you. And we're just trapped in a toxic cycle. So this is kind of why I was asking Keith earlier, why do all these white people, majority, vote for Republicans, the party of the rich? And there is a solidarity in whiteness. So I think if we manage to deconstruct the solidarity of whiteness, that would be something. But that's very hard to do. And also, race is I'm sure you all have heard this before, race is a social construct. So, but race is a necessity over here because this is real. We don't have the same kind of nationality connection. And I've always been fascinated at people who move here from other countries and they form these communities. Like in Jersey City, for example, they have formed these robust Indian communities. And it's amazing to me, and I've heard some critiques of them. My gosh, they moved in here and they took over the city council and they built businesses and they took over the school board. I'm like, well, I ain't mad at them. They utilized their power and they showed up and they formed alliances, right? And they understood who the real threat was. So as far as how we get to that vision, there's also a story of Bacon's Rebellion, really the beginning of the creation of whiteness, where poor whites and poor black folks and Native Americans were rising up, and they created this white ruling class, and they gave more benefits in the courts and in religion and in money to poor white folks. So that is the old story. That is the road not taken. And I don't know how we decolonize each other's minds. I'm here for it, though, if it can happen.
I think you start by reading your books and buying them.
Read my book, baby. A lot of grifters out there.
So I want to thank you guys for all coming out for this evening. Keith and Clay will be in the back to sign books. And stay tuned for more information about the Center for Politics and Race. And let's give another round of applause for Keith and Clay.